Good morning. Today I would like to talk to you a bit about business ethics and give you a general overview of some ideas about business ethics. You may recognize the picture on the screen, Bernie Madoff, who is one of the many people who have been in the news because of business ethics issues. And of course you will see that Bernie Madoff not only violated ethical principles, but also violated the law. And many times, ethics and law do overlap, and something that is unethical is sometimes also illegal. And something illegal is usually also unethical. And so this is just one of many examples of unethical business behavior that we all look at and discuss, and this had an impact on many people. Many people lost everything they have saved for their entire lives because of unethical and illegal behavior of this person. And there are many other examples that we could all name and look at. Business ethics is important. It's important to all of us, regardless of what we do later in our lives. Even if you don't have the concern that you're going to go to jail, even if you live up to the moral minimum or up to the minimum standard of what's legal, you still may have other ethical concerns. And oftentimes, the nice thing is that business ethics not only can keep you out of prison and keep you from violating some ethical code of your profession, which can cause you to lose a license or have other penalties. The nice thing about being ethical is also you can sleep well at night without the concerns that you might have if you are acting unethically. In addition, many people feel that the business ethics is important for business to succeed. So, for example, in some cases, like the Enron case, which is also very famous, some people who were running a corporation decided to do something that led to a very short-term benefit for themselves and other people involved in the corporation. However, they were not looking at the long term. And oftentimes, business ethics and being ethical as a business in the long term actually pays for that business. So for all of these reasons, business ethics is extremely important. And keep in mind that law and ethics are closely related, and that's why we talk about business ethics in this class. And I hope that if you take other classes in the College of Business, that in many of those classes you will also have a discussion and a consideration of business ethics. Now again, a lot of people will say, hey, I already know what's right and wrong. Well, there are a lot of areas that are called gray areas. It's not always an easy decision, and there can be some questions there. This class can't answer all those questions. Probably no one can answer all of those questions. However, this class will hopefully give you a few tools that you could use to help you answer those questions. So let's take a look at a few principles of business ethics and get started with that. Now, one thing you'll want to remember is that there is a connection between law and ethical principles. There are two sort of major areas of business ethics that we'll look at. One is consequentialism and the other is ethical formalism. Keep those two in mind and try to be able to distinguish between the two. Keep in mind also that ethical consequentialism is the chief source of value for business ethics, and we'll talk about why that is. We want you also in this class to have some framework for ethical values in business. There are ways to make decisions, not just based on your own gut reaction, but based upon a system of thinking logically about an ethical question. There are obstacles and rewards for ethical business practice in our country. And so and in our property-based legal system. And so I do want you to keep in mind there are obstacles, but there are also great rewards. All right, a famous judge said, "Law floats in a sea of ethics." Remember that many legal principles and many laws were developed based on ethical principles, what's right and wrong. And so there's a close relationship. Now, there are some things that are legal but not ethical. And there are some things that are ethical but not legal. Hopefully, you can find this nice place where legal and ethical overlap, and you're doing things that are both legal and ethical. That's a great place to be. So let me give you a couple of examples of things that may be legal but not ethical. One example might be that maybe there is no law against saying rude comments to your employees. Maybe the comments are not things that rise to the level of discrimination or sexual harassment or other types of things, but just rude comments. Those comments may be legal. In other words, you may not be put in jail for them or even have to pay any damages to the employees for saying them, but still, even though they are legal, they may not be ethical. Another example of something that might fall within this area of legal but not ethical would be if there is a law in your state, which exists in some states, and it says that physicians may help patients commit suicide if the patient's terminally ill and follows certain procedures. Well, that may be legal. And some folks may feel that it's ethical, but others may feel that it violates their personal values. So that's an area where something might be legal, but some would deem it unethical, and so it would fall right here. Something that could be ethical but not legal. Well, that happens sometimes. During the civil rights movement, people who realized that the law contained some flaws and that people were discriminating against other people based on their race, and there was a strong movement to stop or change that discrimination and to change laws. So in that view of life, and that comes up from time to time, the law and ethics didn't match up. So people like Martin Luther King Jr. and others engaged in civil disobedience, which was technically illegal. They got arrested for some of those things, but it was the ethical thing. And so that falls right here. Now here's a spot right here where there's an overlap. And a lot of things will fall right here. And that's where the easiest place to be is. Now one thing I want to point out here is, in most cases, or almost all cases in business in the U.S., you will want to look at the law first. Well, actually worldwide, not just in the U.S. Sorry, I said just U.S. because it's actually worldwide. First, you want to look at the law. If it's illegal, the best course of action is don't do it. Now, like I said, there can be exceptions in the case of civil disobedience, which is a deliberate activity you might do if the law truly is unjust and wrong. But generally, you're going to want to stay in the area of the legal and the ethical. So the first question to ask yourself is it legal? If it's not legal, just don't do it in most cases. All right, system of ethics. We have two that we will examine. One is formalism. It affirms absolute morality. There are rules that you go by. You do not lie. You do not cheat. You do not steal. You do not kill. There can be a list of rules. It's duty-based. The focus is on actions. And so you will look at an action and say, is this right or wrong? Is it wrong to steal? And if you say yes, then that's the end of the discussion. It doesn't look at consequences. There's something called the categorical imperative, and it's basically saying that someone who's thinking about doing something should say, it's wrong for me if it's wrong for everyone else. In other words, I have a duty to act as I expect everyone else to act. So if I expect everyone else to recycle, or at least not to throw their trash on the ground on campus, then my ethical duty would be to act that way too. If I believe that other people shouldn't cheat on their exams, then the categorical imperative would say, well, also, I must apply that rule to myself, and I must not cheat on exams. But still, it's very rules-based. It focuses on the action, not the consequences. So a good example, there's also social contract theory, construction of a just society, given many inequalities. That's another part of formalism. But what I wanted to say about this is, an example could be, you say, I will never lie, and that's my rule. If you're a formalist and your friend asks you to never break your promise, and you also say, I will never break my promise, and then your friend says, please never tell anyone where I live, and you make that promise. Well, suppose a few days later, a police officer comes up to you and says, I need to know where your friend lives because her life is in danger this minute. A formalist would say, I'm sorry, I made a promise, I cannot tell you. But that would be ignoring the consequences of keeping that promise. If you pay attention to the consequences, then you would tell the police officer. But a formalist would not pay attention to the consequences. They would just say, I do not break promises, I do not do that, so I'm not telling. So that's formalism. So it does have a weakness there in ignoring the consequences of an action or inaction. Now another area, the second area, is consequentialism, which is different. And a lot of business ethics flows from or relies on consequentialism. And it's concerned with the moral consequences of actions. And it involves things like utilitarianism and the Protestant ethic. Now, what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a way of looking at right and wrong by determining whether an action helps or gives the greater good to the greater number. Now, that's really, it sounds nice to look at consequences of your action and see, does it bring greater happiness to more people than the consequences of a different action? The problem is that how do you figure which people are most important in this? How much harm or good, how do you measure that? And so it's not that easy. But consequentialism, in the case I gave you earlier, would tell you, we've got to look at the consequences of me telling the police or not telling the police where my friend lives. And the consequences of life or death would tell me that greater good for greater number is basically going to tell me I have to tell the police. So you can get different results from formalism and consequentialism in some cases. All right. Now, sometimes you can have an ethical dilemma, and you can try applying each of these areas. So let's just say, just like the textbook mentions, that you want to decide whether or not to secretly monitor your employees' activities on their computers. So you engage in formalism first, and it's basically saying, would I want somebody to do this to me, secretly monitor my computer activity? It's also saying, is that right or wrong, that activity? Focus on the action, not the consequences. In that form of reasoning, you might say, hey, this violates people's privacy. So I don't think it's right, so I'm not going to do it. Now, on the other hand, consequentialism would focus more on whether the results promote the common good. So you would look at not the action of secretly monitoring your employees, but you would look instead at the results of that. And you might say, hey, that would be great if I monitor my employees and find them doing something they shouldn't, like sending a sexually harassing email to someone or wasting time at work, then I could fire those employees or somehow punish them and stop this bad activity. And that would be good for business. That would be one way to think about it in terms of consequentialism. But you might take that a little further and think it through some more. Once I do that, what does that do to the morale of the other employees when they realize that you've been violating their privacy for a while? that might be bad for business. The consequences of your action might have a very negative effect on employee morale. And so for that reason, you might in the end decide the cost of secretly monitoring emails and so forth outweighs the benefits. And so again, you're going to look at the consequences and you might say, still not going to do it either way. Now, how would you resolve this? Well, you still want the result that people waste less time at work and don't engage in certain types of behavior that might subject the company to lawsuit, like a sexual harassment lawsuit. How would you resolve it? Well, maybe instead of secretly monitoring employees, you might tell employees, we will monitor you from time to time to make sure you're not improperly using our computer equipment. And you might have the employees sign a statement saying that they acknowledge that. And that could be a great result that is much more acceptable under either formalism or consequentialism. Now we have stakeholders. I do want to mention these briefly. I don't want to belabor the point too much at this point, but I do want you to be thinking about how your decisions affect other people. Sometimes your gut reaction will be a certain answer to an ethical question, but you need to step back and look at the effect your ethical decision will have on various stakeholders. Some stakeholders would be shareholders, employees, suppliers, customers, community, government, and maybe others. For example, it could be shareholders' families, or it could be the fish in the sea if you're polluting. Lots of different possibilities here. You can think very broadly about stakeholders. It could be an unborn child of one of your employees. So what you want to do when you're making an ethical decision is try to make a list of who has a stake or who is affected by your decision, and then examine who does this decision benefit and who does it hurt. Now, some people will say that shareholders should be your only concern. I'm not sure we want to go that far, although I will say shareholders are extremely important as owners of your business. If you're on the board of directors of a company and you have shareholders, you have a real responsibility to take care of their interests. However, sometimes if you also are looking out for the interests of employees, suppliers, and customers, the effect of that will also help the shareholders. So be thinking about stakeholders. Be thinking about how to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of your stakeholders in your business decisions. And hopefully that is a good framework to start with. Again, you may also have to start figuring that out and decide some things. And then also you may have to get creative and think outside of the box about ways to meet the needs of most stakeholders and the most important stakeholders, even if, say, the interest of a shareholder is different from the interest of one of your employees. So do think this through, and we will apply this from time to time throughout the class, and thank you for listening. Have a great day.